Many things are still a baffling mystery in our world. Science doesn't quite yet have all the answers or all the keys to unlock the secrets of our universe. Every day, somewhere, someone sees something they can't explain. Something that we're told is not there, is not real, or simply doesn't exist. Too many reliable people tell of sightings and encounters with the unknown. The myths, legends, folklore, and old wives' tales are usually based in fact and in reality. When a witness to such a strange encounter finds no one believes them and faces ridicule from people they trust and love, they turn to us, the Alabama Bigfoot Society. From the heart of the South, this is Alabama Adventure. Now this is a painting that I purchased many years ago, and I liked it when I first saw it. If you remember years ago, there used to be commercials come on the TV down here that said they were having like a starving artist sale, and that's where this came from. I went to a starving artist sale, and this particular painting caught my eye when I walked in the room. Anyway, as you can see, the old cowboy has got his saddle horse, and he's moving on, and he's got his pack horse behind him, so they're doing a little traveling. And that's what we're going to do in this Alabama adventure. We're going to have to travel a little bit, and I'll tell you about it in just a moment. Now, on this Alabama adventure, we travel over to the great state of Georgia. I used to do some Bigfoot and paranormal investigating over there in west central Georgia. And this is a UFO sighting that I heard of over there one day. A man told me this story, and anyway, I went over there and met him in Franklin, Georgia. Franklin, Georgia is in Heard County, if you try to find it and everything. And this particular sighting happened in a little cove on the far end of Lake West Point. Now, let me give you a little background before we get started on the story, as I always do whenever we begin a Alabama adventure. I guess this will be Alabama and Georgia adventure today. But anyway, I used to like to go to Franklin. There was a couple of little places over there that I like to eat. And back in the days that I went over there, which have been several years ago now, had some real good food over there. And I'm pretty sure that they still have good food over there today. If you over around Franklin, Georgia, you might want to go check out some of their eating establishments over there. I used to pass through there a good bit with a friend of mine. We traveled over to some of his family over in Grantville and Hogansville, Georgia. And sometimes we would stop and eat on the way over there. He had cousins over there, because I've got some cousins that live over in Savannah, down in Albany, and that particular area. I have a lot of good friends up around Buckhannon and Bremen, Cedartown, and Rome up that way. That's some people that I know. I don't really know a lot of people from Heard County, but I'm going to tell you about this man that told me about this UFO sighting in just a minute. I want to mention one thing about Buckhannon, Georgia. There was a very good friend of mine that lived up there, and I spoke with her family just a few days ago. I hadn't seen them in several years, and was real glad to see them. She and I were never really boyfriend and girlfriend, anything like that, although we did go out on dates several times. And the reason I'm telling you this, whenever she and I met and we went out to eat and stuff like that a few times, it was right after me and another friend had seen a UFO one night. And of course, she brought that up and we talked about it. And on our first date, I guess you could call it, after we got through eating down in Auburn that night, we returned back to Wadley. I was bringing her back to her cousin's house. But anyway, we decided to make a little detour, and we went up to a place where me and this other friend had seen this UFO, and she and I Sat out there a good while that night. It was a good warm night, so we sat out there on the outside and sky watched a little while, I guess you could call it. But best I remember, we did see a circular light go overhead way up in the sky, and it didn't make any sound. And that's what she and I talked about. She and I did go see a UFO. But she passed away a few years ago, and I would like to dedicate this video to her memory. Okay, so now here's the story on this UFO that was spotted near Franklin, Georgia. I'll just tell you to begin with that it was a cigar-shaped UFO. Anyway, the man that told me about it, I met him over at a convenience store, so you'll kind of know where it is if you're familiar with Franklin. As you come into Franklin, you'll cross the Chattahoochee River Bridge if you're headed toward LaGrange. There's a little convenience store there on the right, and that's where he and I made plans to meet early one morning. And that matter of fact, well, out there's where I met him at. So anyway, we wound up going pretty close to the location to where he had seen this UFO. But anyway, here is his story of what he told me. He enjoyed fishing. He did a lot of fishing, and after West Point Lake was built and the fish became very numerous in there, then he said that he fished a lot, and he had one little particular, like a little hidden cove where he liked to go that he called his place. It didn't tell anybody else about it, and that's where he liked to go fishing. On this particular morning that he saw this UFO, he said he got there a little while before daylight, as he always liked to be fishing as the sun came up. He said in this particular spot, that's where the fish seemed to bite better. So that's what he was doing, and he said he had been there for probably 30 minutes or more and was casting and had, I believe, said he had caught some fish that morning. But anyway, he said he heard some kind of little strange noise. It was kind of like a hum of some type of motor or generator or something. He said it wasn't very loud, and said if you were walking through leaves or stuff like that, that you wouldn't even pay any attention to it. But as he was sitting on the bank of Lake West Point, he said he could hear this hum on and off, and said a time or two it sounded like he heard water, like dropping or falling or something like that. Said it wasn't loud, it wasn't a very loud splash, but he could just hear the sound of water hitting water. But anyway, he said, as I said, he said he'd been there for a good while casting and fishing and everything, and he said then the sun began to come up. And he said as the sun began to come up, he said maybe 50 to 60 feet so over the water was this large shaped object just hovering there. And said he was almost under this thing where the object was. And he said the object was at least 100 feet long, if not longer. He said he really wasn't that good at estimating the exact length of something, but he said he would estimate it that it was well around 100 feet long, and it was round and it was long. As I said, it was cigar shaped. And he said he didn't hardly know what to do. He said to begin with, it was so large that he actually thought it was a big cloud up in the sky until he looked at it a little closer, and then he could tell that this thing was some type of craft, aircraft of some type, or a spaceship, whatever you want to call it. And he said when he saw this thing that he quit fishing, he just sort of overwhelmed by what it was. It was just sitting there floating in the air. And he said on one end of it, just right after daylight, that this door opened, and said he could hear like hydraulics or something like that, electric sound or something, as this square door opened on the far end of it. And he said when this happened, that this tube began to come out of this door, a dark colored tube. Said it looked black to him, and said the tube went all the way down to the top of the lake. And where it appeared to him, because it was already after daylight now, that this thing was sucking water up into the craft. And he said where this door opened and this tube came out, he said it was a brilliant blue. He asked me, had I ever seen the blue like on a welder whenever somebody was welding. He said that's the color blue that the inside of this craft was. And he said then he could hear something that sounded like a generator or a motor or some type of engine that sounded like it was pulling this water up out of the lake into this craft. And he said this went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. This thing sat there, but said it never moved. It didn't bobble or anything. It just continued to suck the water up. And he said after a little bit, that whatever he heard humming in the inside quit, and this tube quickly pulled up out of the water and went back into the craft. And he said as this tube went up, that there was water falling out of it, and he could hear it splashing back on the top of the lake, as he had heard earlier. So anyway, he said in just a few seconds, this tube went back into the craft. The door on it closed, and he said then this thing made this type of maneuver, and I'll get a pen to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Now, what I want to do with this pen is to kind of show you what happened over there that morning, the way that he told it to me. He said when he first saw this craft, it was sitting long ways to him out over the water, and said he could look all the way down the side of it. And he said after the pipe or whatever it was in the water went back in the door and the door shut, he said in just a few seconds this thing began to turn. And he said it slowly made a 90-degree turn. And he said when it came to a stop, the bottom of the craft, the rear end of the craft, was directly over his head. And he said he wanted to run, but said he was actually afraid to move at the time. He said then this thing kind of tilted, the front end tilted up and the rear end kind of tilted down. And he said when it tilted down that it was probably only about 30 feet over his head. And he said he was really thinking about running then, but said he was actually so afraid that he just could not move. But he said when this thing took off, said it took off like a bullet. He said it was just gone. He said there was no sound, there was no exhaust, nothing. And he said in less than 2 seconds he knew that this thing was so far out in the sky that it was completely out of sight. So that's the story of the Franklin, Georgia Cigar Shaped UFO. And what I would also like to tell you once again is this is a painting that I did so I could illustrate what it looked like. And he said that this was exactly what he saw that morning. If you would be interested in purchasing this picture, just contact me through the Contact Us page on the website, alabamabigfootsociety.com, and you can make an offer on this painting, and I guess I'll sell it to whoever makes the best offer. Also, before we go, I would like to once again say that I would like to dedicate this video in memory of Nan Sims, who was a very good friend of mine, and it was very tragic whenever she did pass away. I believe she died with cancer a few years ago, and it was all a great loss to everyone whose lives she touched. Well, that was this edition of Alabama Adventures, and I guess in this case we'll call it Alabama and Georgia Adventure, as it was the case of the Franklin, Georgia cigar-shaped UFO sighting. As I always do, I'd like to say hello to my granddaughter Madison. I'd also like to tell you that the Alabama Bigfoot Society is run completely out of pocket, and if you would like to make a donation, then just go to our website, alabamabigfootsociety.com, and you'll find a place on the front page where you can make that donation, whether it be money or whether it be equipment. And a lot of times I have people who email me and ask me, what type of equipment can I send you? What do you need? Well, we'll take anything from a flashlight to a vehicle. Or if you have land that we could set aside for Bigfoot, we'd be glad to take that. Or if you have a house you need to get rid of, or maybe a jet plane, all that would be fine. Just contact me and I'll make arrangements to get it. Anyway, if you like this video, I hope you'll give us a like. If you like what we're doing down here in Alabama with our Bigfoot and paranormal investigations, then I hope you subscribe to the channel. With all that being said, I guess I'll see you next time on the next Alabama Adventure.